Since the beginning of recorded time, Saturn hasn't just been another light in the sky, it's been the god behind the curtain. Every single ancient civilization that had access to the heavens focused on this one entity with a fear and respect that didn't make sense for just a planet. They didn't call it a planet. They called it a god, a force, a judge. The Romans called him Saturn. The Greeks called him Cronus. The Phoenicians, Baal-Hamon. The Hindus, Shani. All of them described the same characteristics: the devourer of children, the enforcer of cycles, the punisher of disobedience. And that pattern alone should wake people up, because we're not talking about mythology here. We're talking about global synchronization around one symbol of control and death. Saturn is worshipped not because it brings life, but because it manages time. And time is not a gift, it's a cage. Every ticking second is another link in the chain. The myth of Cronus eating his children isn't about cannibalism, it's about devouring potential. Every soul, every spark of consciousness that tries to rise, gets crushed by the weight of cyclical imprisonment. You live, you die, you reincarnate, and you forget. Again and again and again. Saturn governs that system. It governs karma, consequence, delay, punishment, fate. It's the celestial warden of your spiritual incarceration. You think the ancients were primitive? Look again. The elite priesthoods of Babylon, Egypt, and Rome didn't just observe Saturn, they revolved their power structures around it. The Saturnalia festival in Rome wasn't a holiday, it was a ritualized chaos where order was inverted, sacrifices were made, and authority figures impersonated gods. Why? Because that's what Saturn represents: inversion. It punishes the light, it rewards control, and it thrives in hierarchy. It is the template behind every top-down, soul-crushing institution on this planet. Political systems? Modeled on Saturnian principles. Religious dogma? Dripping with Saturn's structure, guilt, sin, hierarchy, sacrifice, obedience. You were born into a system modeled after this force. Not by accident. Saturn's day is Saturday, the seventh day, the day of rest in Judaism, the true holy day before it was hijacked. Look at the word itself, Saturn Day. The system couldn't be more blatant. It's in the calendar. It's in the clock. It's in the very structure of how we measure existence. And who gave us that structure? The same cultures that built pyramids, ziggurats, and temples aligned to the stars, and most critically, to Saturn's path across the sky. So don't tell me this is superstition. This is systemized knowledge passed down in coded architecture, rituals, and symbols, knowledge only the elite were allowed to keep intact. And here's where it gets dark. Saturn isn't just represented by rings in the sky. It's encoded into your physical environment. Ever notice how the color black dominates robes of judges, priests, academics? That's Saturn's color. The square hats at graduation ceremonies? That's a black cube, again, Saturn's signature. It's not fashion. It's ritual uniform. It's symbolism hammered into your life under the guise of culture and tradition. The elite wear black not out of style, but out of alignment. They serve the architect of law, control, and separation. Every robe, every gavel, every square cap, it's a silent oath to Saturn. Saturn governs limitation, the boundaries of form, the hard edges of reality, the pain of consequence. It thrives in fear and restriction. In Gnostic cosmology, the Archons, false rulers of the material realm, are the agents of Saturn. They aren't demons in the classical sense. They're enforcers of the simulation. Jailers. Saturn is their chief. He's the one who enforces the amnesia of incarnation, the veil of forgetfulness. You're born, and you forget everything you knew before. That's Saturn's fingerprint. He's not a bringer of knowledge, he's the enforcer of forgetting. Every ancient depiction of Saturn is associated with scythes, hourglasses, chains, and death. These aren't random. The scythe represents harvest, cutting down souls at their end. The hourglass is time running out. The chains are the bond of reincarnation. And death? That's the gateway back into the system. There is no end in this cycle. Just extraction, memory wipe, and return. Saturn's domain isn't just the physical world, it's the mechanism that locks consciousness into repetitive loops of suffering masked as growth. Don't skip over this. The Gnostics, long before institutional Christianity burned their texts, warned about the rulers of the seven heavens. Saturn sat at the top. The Demiurge, Yaldabaoth, was said to use Saturn as the seat of his judgment. Not in fire, but in delay. Not in wrath, but in rules. You want justice? Saturn gives you red tape. You want redemption? Saturn gives you contracts. Every desire for freedom is met with a cosmic legal system. And the Archons love paperwork. Saturn is the bureaucracy of the soul. Still think it's just mythology? Every major religion has embedded Saturnian archetypes into its structure. The Abrahamic religions use fear, law, punishment, sacrifice, and obedience as spiritual currency. That's not enlightenment. That's control. That's Saturn. The notion that suffering purifies the soul, that pain is sacred, that delay is divine, that's not wisdom. That's programming. That's the Saturnian algorithm. It's the same script recycled through temples, churches, mosques, and governments. Different costumes. Same warden. The irony? Modern science tries to wash this away with sterile language. It's just a gas giant. It's just rings of ice and dust. They ignore thousands of years of encoded warning signs. That's not education. That's erasure. That's how you strip a planet of its spiritual memory and turn it into a dead object in the sky. But Saturn isn't dead. It's active. It's humming at 60 Hz. That's right, NASA recorded a constant tone coming from Saturn's poles. Why does a dead planet produce a sound like a machine? Ask yourself that. And then there's the cube. The black cube is everywhere. Mecca, Manhattan, CERN, Holocaust memorials. It's not cultural diversity, it's unified symbology. Every black cube is a monument to the force behind the illusion. The cube is Saturn's altar, and the people circle it like electrons around a nucleus, trapped, predictable, hypnotized. You want to see how deep it goes? Look at your own technology. Look at logos. Corporate brands. The cube, the ring, the black. It's not design, it's declaration. The ancients weren't dumb. They knew they were dealing with a conscious force that imposed structure on spirit. That calcified time, hardened form, and entrapped awareness. The very fact that we interpret that knowledge as superstition shows how far we've fallen. The priesthoods use Saturn to create law, hierarchy, and ritual to bind souls. And now, that same framework has been globalized. It's the invisible skeleton of the matrix you live in. Every schedule, every ceremony, every punishment, it traces back to Saturn. Let's talk about the forbidden texts. The ones stripped from your Bible, buried in the desert, hidden in caves, locked behind Vatican walls, or conveniently labeled heretical by the same institutions that claim to speak for God. These aren't fringe ramblings. These are the core writings that expose the architecture of control, especially the role of Saturn as the top-level enforcer in the soul containment system. And you won't hear this in church, synagogue, or mosque, because once you start reading the banned scriptures, you realize the entire narrative of salvation, judgment, and creation was rewritten to protect the system, not to free the soul. Start with the Gnostic Gospels. These weren't written by pagans or outsiders. They were written by early followers of the so-called Christ movement, people who believed the message of divine awakening had been hijacked and distorted. In the Apocryphon of John, Saturn doesn't appear as a planet or a background character. He is embedded in the persona of Yaldabaoth, the false god, the blind creator. The one who declared himself the only god and demanded worship. Yaldabaoth is not the father of light. He is the architect of limitation, and he is directly associated with Saturn in both symbol and function. These texts describe 7 rulers of the heavens, 7 planetary archons. Saturn isn't just one of them, he's the chief. The highest authority in the matrix. And guess what his job is? To block souls from escaping the material realm. To enforce the cycle. To judge. To harvest. The Gnostics didn't talk about heaven and hell. They talked about the prison of flesh and the jailers who kept divine sparks trapped in corrupted bodies. And they didn't call these forces demons. They called them Archons. Not evil in the cartoonish sense, just obedient, mechanical, hierarchical. That's Saturn's domain: order, judgment, hierarchy, control. Now look at the Gospel of the Egyptians, one of the most explicit anti-Saturnian texts ever written. In it, the soul isn't judged by a benevolent God but interrogated by astral gatekeepers. These entities demand passwords, rituals, energy signatures. And those who fail to pass are sent back down, recycled. Over and over. The document even mentions that only those who know the name of the father of the world rulers can pass through. And that name is connected to the planetary forces, Saturn being the last and hardest to bypass. Again, not metaphor. That's spiritual mechanics laid bare. The Valentinian texts go even deeper. They speak of a divine pleroma, a fullness beyond the physical universe, unreachable unless the soul breaks through the veil of the Archons. The final veil is described as the outer darkness. That's not poetic. That's the outermost shell, Saturn's domain. The place where the false creator sits in counterfeit glory. Wearing the robes of godhood but radiating control, not liberation. That's who rules this matrix. That's the true king of the religious world, not the father, but the warden. You think mainstream religion escaped this influence? Every Abrahamic tradition contains Saturnian mechanics at its core. The obsession with law, judgment, sacrifice, obedience, divine punishment, and eternal cycles of reward and suffering, those are Saturnian attributes, not divine truths. The Gnostics said it clearly: the God of the Old Testament was a false deity. A builder, not a source. A ruler, not a redeemer. The one who said, "I am a jealous God," was not the infinite light. They said he was Yaldabaoth, the Saturnian force who hijacked creation. And that's why these texts were destroyed, discredited, or buried. Because they didn't flatter the system. They exposed it. They didn't comfort the masses, they warned them. And the people in power couldn't allow that. So the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, all silenced. And in their place, a curated book designed to reinforce fear, guilt, obedience, and submission to an unseen authority. A book that puts the warden on the throne and tells you it's your father. But the clues still leaked through. Even in the canonical texts. The book of Revelation mentions 7 stars in the right hand of the Son of Man. Those aren't just stars, they're planetary rulers. The final one, the most powerful one, the one whose seal must be broken for the system to collapse, that's Saturn. And what happened when the 6th seal breaks? Earthquakes. Black sun. Falling stars. That's not the end of the world. That's the end of containment. That's the system rebooting because the control layer was breached. In esoteric Judaism, Saturn appears as Shabbatai, the slow, heavy force associated with restriction and consequence. He's not celebrated. He's feared. And he's still honored every Saturday, the Sabbath. The day of rest, the day of restriction, the day of the black robe. That's not spirituality. That's ritualized submission to Saturn's calendar. And it was baked into monotheism from day one. Let's talk about the black cube. The cube represents spatial limitation. 6 sides, 6 directions, 6 faces, total encapsulation of 3-dimensional form. That's not just geometry. That's ideology. The cube is not the shape of freedom. It's the blueprint of confinement. It's the box your soul is shoved into the moment it enters this plane. In esoteric traditions, especially in Kabbalah, the cube is linked directly to the material plane, called Malkuth, the lowest sephira on the tree of life, ruled by none other than the force of Saturn. So, when you see that cube replicated around the world, it's not cultural variety, it's one central theme: veneration of the prison and its architect. And here's the part they don't teach you in school or theology. You aren't just surrounded by cubes, you participate in them. You graduate with a black square on your head, strapped with a tassel like a leash. You work in cube-shaped offices, sit in cube-based grids, and carry black cubes in your pocket every day, your phone. Your entertainment, your job, your digital life, it's filtered through a Saturnian cube. It's not just metaphor. It's practical. The cube is the interface between your mind and the system. Every time you tap the screen, you're interfacing with the machine willingly. The tech isn't neutral. It's symbolic. The cube absorbs your attention and transmits your energy back to the grid. Constantly. The rituals never stopped. They just changed costume. Ancient Saturnian cults wore black robes, held secret gatherings, moved in silence and hierarchy. Today? Judges, priests, academics, corporate elites, same uniform, same codes. Black robes, ceremonial processions, hierarchical rankings. Only the altars have changed. And you want to see how deep it goes? Watch the masses circle the Kaaba. That isn't just religious fervor. That is a full-scale Saturnian rite of energetic circulation. The human body used as energy current. The black cube positioned at the core. This is an energy ritual hiding in plain sight. And don't think this is isolated to one religion. That's the trap. The cube is universal because the force behind it is universal. You'll find it embedded in Judaism through the tefillin, a literal black cube strapped to the head during prayer. Christianity? The church itself is a box. The altar is a cube. The pulpit is square. And everything is dressed in Saturn's color, black. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they're all laced with the same geometry. That's not diversity of faith. That's mass-scale spiritual standardization. You're not dealing with isolated religions that happen to choose blackened boxes by accident. You're dealing with a globally enforced metaphysical infrastructure. One that predates your country, your religion, your culture. One that was deliberately encoded into the foundations of society. The cube is the physical representation of Saturn's dominion in this realm. And the more you accept it as a normal, the deeper you are inside the system. It's not about beliefs. It's about symbols. Symbols that don't ask for permission, they just operate. And the institutions that run this world, they know it. That's why you'll see black cubes inside government buildings, military memorials, global bank logos, university seals, and tech startup branding. They're not drawing from some common design template, they're signaling. They're broadcasting allegiance to the operating system. It's not about business. It's about spiritual jurisdiction. These symbols are not passive, they're active. They carry frequency, they shape consciousness, and they guide collective perception. Let's bring it closer to home. Ask yourself, why are cube-based structures always tied to authority and judgment? The judge sits in a cube-shaped court. The student graduates with a cube-shaped cap. The employee works in a cubicle. The architect of this system wants you inside the box, physically, mentally, spiritually. Because once you're boxed, you're predictable. You're aligned. You're programmable. The cube doesn't just hold you, it conditions you. It shapes your thought patterns. The more cube structures you're exposed to, the more your consciousness conforms to linear thinking, rigid obedience, and mechanical routine. That's how Saturn operates. Not through terror, but through repetition. Through geometry. Through ritual. You don't need fear when you have architecture. You don't need chains when you have mental constructs. You don't need guards when you have symbols doing the work silently. That's the genius of the system, it doesn't need to be enforced. It's embedded. That's why you never question the shape of your classroom, your office, your phone, your ritual garments. The cube is so normalized that the prison vanishes. That's the power of true control, not to enslave your body, but to make you worship the walls around you. And the worship is real. Every religion that uses the cube, whether consciously or unconsciously, directs psychic energy to Saturn. That's the esoteric purpose of ritual, channeling collective energy toward an entity or archetype. The black cube is the receiver. You are the transmitter. And during moments of prayer, graduation, mourning, ceremony, you are aligned, willingly or not. That energy goes somewhere. It's not symbolic. It's currency. You are paying with your attention, your focus, your emotion. The cube absorbs it. Saturn benefits. You want the most grotesque proof? Look at corporate branding. Start with Saturn cars. Their logo is the stylized cross-section of the planet Saturn. Go further, check the logos of some of the biggest corporations in the world. Squares, black blocks, ringed circles, variations of the same Saturnian code. This isn't just aesthetic. This is allegiance. The companies that dominate your reality, Google, Apple, IBM, Samsung, all of them use Saturnian shapes. Boxes, cubes, rings. They're not selling products. They're embedding symbolism. Even the entertainment industry plays along. Look at sci-fi and fantasy. The villain's headquarters? A black cube. The enemy AI? A cube. The mysterious alien artifact. A black, floating box. This isn't creative innovation. This is psychological priming. The cube is slowly being associated with power, mystery, control. You're being taught to respect it, fear it, obey it. All while pretending it's fiction. That's not entertainment. That's symbolic indoctrination. Now think about the psychological implications of constant exposure to cube symbolism. It creates behavioral uniformity, structured thinking, binary logic, submissive behavior. The cube is not fluid. It is rigid, defined, immovable. And that's exactly what the system wants from you. Not inspiration. Not transcendence. Obedience. Alignment. Silence. The more cubes you interact with, the more your behavior mirrors the symbol itself, cold, patterned, and structured. Let's get into the rings. NASA picked up radio emissions coming from Saturn's rings decades ago. These aren't passive echoes, they're patterned frequencies. Structured sounds that pulse in measurable, mechanical rhythms. That's not something floating ice does. That's a system. A frequency-based operating mechanism. And still, no mainstream outlet is asking real questions. Because they're not allowed to. You start pointing at frequency structures in planetary rings and suddenly you're on a list. You're not dealing with space dust. You're dealing with containment tech on a planetary scale. Something ancient. Something designed. In ancient esoteric texts, particularly the Gnostic and Hermetic traditions, there are references to planetary spheres as gates. Layers of vibration that a soul must pass through after death. Each one ruled by a gatekeeper. And guess who sits on the outermost ring? Saturn. Always Saturn. The final threshold before anything escapes the system. That's not mythology, that's infrastructure. The rings are part of the trap. They don't keep things out. They keep things in. They're not defenses against invaders. They're barriers against escape. Sound and vibration are the tools of control in esoteric architecture. You're looking at planetary scale resonance fences. Think of the rings as tuning forks, emitting frequencies that synchronize the consciousness within the system to match its prison. Keep the vibration low, the awareness dulled, and the soul confined to repeat cycles. People talk about breaking the reincarnation trap, escaping the matrix, but they never trace it back to the hardware that holds it in place. Saturn's rings are the hardware. And it's not just mystics who figured it out. Cultures that had zero contact with each other still encoded Saturn's ring system in their iconography long before telescopes. Ancient Hindu diagrams, Egyptian temple ceilings, Sumerian carvings, they all show a ring deity, a lord of boundaries, a master of time. Not a friendly god. A force of restriction. That level of consistent, transcontinental iconography isn't myth, it's eyewitness testimony. These civilizations weren't theorizing, they were reporting. You can't ignore the physics here either. Not the sanitized academic kind, but the esoteric physics. In every major occult system, the path to liberation requires breaking through the rings or spheres that encircle the Earth realm. These are energetic layers tied to planetary consciousness. Saturn governs the outermost one. It's not a gate, it's a lock. And the key isn't moral behavior or religious obedience. It's frequency alignment. And that's why the rings exist. To disrupt it. To suppress it. To keep the frequency of the trapped soul in resonance with the system low, mechanical, repetitive. Even the structure of Saturn's rings is suspect. They're thin, unrealistically thin, yet perfectly aligned, dense, and divided into mathematically harmonious segments. That doesn't happen naturally. That's engineering. There's a hexagonal storm on Saturn's north pole, another geometric anomaly. Not a swirling weather pattern. A perfectly symmetrical six-sided shape embedded in the planet's atmosphere, and it doesn't move. It's fixed. You're looking at the mechanical fingerprint of something built, not born. Ask yourself how the ancients were able to describe Saturn as a multi-ring power long before the telescope was invented. They didn't have access to satellites or space probes. They weren't guessing. They were in contact with something either through altered states, rituals, or direct transmission that revealed Saturn's real role. And what did they do with that knowledge? They turned it into systems of control, rituals of obedience, and calendars of worship. Because once you realize the planet is a machine and the rings are its perimeter fence, everything else falls into place. Every soul that dies here is drawn toward the light. Everyone's heard about it. The tunnel. The guides. The memory review. And yet nobody questions who built that tunnel. Why there's a light. Why we're magnetically pulled to it. Because beyond that tunnel are the spheres, the vibrational shells. And the last one, the one that pulls you back down, is Saturn's. That's where the cycle resets. You don't ascend. You recycle. You loop. You lose your memories and start again. That's not divine mercy. That's a soul farm. And the rings are the electric fences. You want to understand how far this system goes? Let's talk about child sacrifice. And no, this isn't some outdated tribal practice tucked away in the past. This is about a pattern, an energy dynamic, that traces straight back to Saturn and continues in sanitized, ritualized forms today. The ancient name Moloch is often thrown around like it's some obscure demon no one needs to care about. But Moloch was just one of the masks. A symbol. A function. A vessel for energy exchange. And that energy went straight to Saturn. Every offering, every burned child, every blood ritual performed in the ancient world wasn't random, it was strategic. It was about opening a line to the warden. The Carthaginians weren't barbaric outliers. They were initiated. They knew the rules. You want power, prosperity, or protection. You give up what's pure. You give up life before it reaches full awareness. Why children? Because they carry raw, unprocessed life force, pure potential. The system feeds on that. And the so-called gods that demanded it weren't divine beings, they were planetary intelligences, consciousness clusters, or archonic managers operating under Saturn's jurisdiction. These weren't benevolent entities testing human morality. They were administrators of a closed-circuit system, and child sacrifice was just the most direct, brutal form of transaction. Look at the iconography. Moloch is always represented with a bull's head, sometimes metallic, often open-mouthed, with fire burning inside. And people somehow think that has nothing to do with Saturn? You already saw the crossover. The bull is sacred to Saturn across multiple cultures. In Roman religion, the bull was tied to agricultural cycles governed by Saturn. In astrology, the connection between Taurus and Saturn is used in restriction-based rituals. The sacrifice wasn't symbolic. It was Saturnian economics. Give blood, receive harvest. Burn life, gain favor. And the entire elite priesthoods that conducted these rites weren't ashamed, they were proud. Because they believed they were keeping the system alive. Fast forward to now, and the form has changed, but the energy logic hasn't. You're still living in a world where sacrifice is currency. It's just rebranded. Sanitized. Hidden behind institutions and ceremonies. But scratch the surface and you'll see it: mass death as ritual, war as offering, systemized trauma as fuel. Why do you think war memorials and government buildings still use black cubes and Saturnian architecture? Because the energetic pattern hasn't changed. The system still demands loss, still thrives on emotional release, especially from the young, the innocent, the unaware. Let's keep going. Why do you think so many ancient temples dedicated to Saturn or his equivalents were built on ley lines, geomagnetic intersections, or under specific star alignments? Because energy harvesting was calculated. Precise. The goal wasn't faith, it was frequency extraction. These temples weren't places of worship. They were conductors. Grids. Technologies. You give the system your children, your blood, your fear, and in return you get temporary material gain, political power, or protection from the wrath of the same force that set the rules. That's not religion. That's blackmail. Even the modern state still mirrors this structure. Government sending young people, barely adults, to die in wars they don't understand for causes that are intentionally murky. That's ritual. And the public, unaware, participates in the collective mourning. The emotional outpour. The ceremonies. The flags. The bugles. The honor. It's all dressed up, but it's the same transaction. Sacrifice to maintain the system. And the system is Saturnian. Now take a look at the recurring symbolism used in elite events, corporate logos, entertainment spectacles. You'll see the same bull's head. The fire themes. The cube imagery. The Saturn rings. Over and over. It's not art. It's not edgy design. It's communication. These groups aren't just randomly obsessed with esoteric symbols, they're signaling participation. They're acknowledging the source of their authority and power. You don't get to rise in that hierarchy without submitting to the formula. Saturn doesn't give power freely. You earn it through obedience and sacrifice. And for those who refuse? Isolation. Destruction. Erasure. Because Saturn governs punishment just as much as reward. You can dig into secret society rituals from every continent, and you'll keep finding the same Saturnian traits: darkness, restriction, blood, time cycles, oaths, and hierarchy. You're not dealing with cultural diversity, you're looking at a planetary cult with regional dialects. Freemasonry, Roman priesthoods, Babylonian temple rites, Aztec blood rituals, they all plug into the same energetic structure. It always circles back to the planet that isn't just a rock in space, but a centralized control point for soul containment. And don't forget the modern proxies. Abortion clinics positioned like factories. Organ trafficking rings operating under elite protection. Massive abuse cover-ups inside religious institutions. These aren't isolated scandals. They're part of the same frequency pattern: take life, bleed it, suppress its memory, recycle the energy. Whether it's voluntary or coerced, conscious or ritualized, doesn't matter. The result is the same. Saturn's current stays fed. You think the elites don't know this? Of course they do. They write it in stone, carve it into walls, project it during opening ceremonies. The public sees a show. The insiders see an invocation. That's why they love ritual. It sustains the energetic contract between the governors of the system and the force behind the rings. And the blood, spilled, shed, or sacrificed, keeps that force in control. The only thing that's changed is the narrative. The mechanics? Still the same. Still Saturn. Still the warden. Let's break down the number they don't want you to touch, 6. You've heard it your entire life. You've seen it in the Book of Revelation. You've watched the media use it in shock headlines. You've seen it plastered across conspiracy forums, churches, horror movies, and secret society rituals. The 666. But nobody explains the root, the structure, the design. This number is not some childish scare tactic, it's Saturn's code. It's the branding stamp of the warden. And it shows up everywhere for a reason. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun. Saturday is the 6th day of the week. The hexagon storm on Saturn's pole? 6 sides. 6 points. 6 vectors. That's not natural symmetry, it's imposed design. When ancient systems built numerology, they weren't playing with math. They were mapping frequencies. 6 is the number of form. 6 directions. 6 faces of a cube. It's the basis of containment. When you see 666, you're not looking at evil incarnate, you're looking at a frequency pattern that binds energy inside a 3-dimensional cage. It's mechanical. It's mathematical. It's Saturnian. You've been taught that 666 means the mark of the beast. But the original text in Revelation doesn't say it's evil, it says it's the number of a man. A system. A machine. Not an individual villain with horns, but an encoded reference to an identity rooted in control. The beast isn't one person, it's a mechanism. And that mechanism is Saturn. The god of limitation. The archetype of judgment. The force behind the wheel of karma and material entrapment. The mark isn't stamped on your skin, it's embedded in your consciousness, your habits, your rituals, your architecture. You've been carrying it without even realizing it. The Bible isn't hiding it. It's built around it. Go back to the construction of Solomon's temple. Dimensions, materials, rituals, every element encoded with 6. 6 steps, 6 wings, 6 branches. Even the menorah. Then go to the beast system in Revelation, 666 talents of gold. Not coins. Not metaphors. Exact weights. Currency of power. A value placed on control. The system runs on that number because the number holds the vibration of Saturn's realm. And the cube? Do the math. A cube has 6 faces. And when you unfold that cube into a 2-dimensional cross, what do you get? A T-shaped symbol. That shape has been used in sacrificial rituals, religious iconography, and occult diagrams for millennia. Not because it's holy, but because it reflects the structure of the trap. 6 surfaces. Bound space. Control in every direction. That's the foundation of this matrix. Not energy flow. Not freedom. Structured opposition. Cold design. Even in classical geometry, hexagons dominate. The hexagon isn't just a 6-sided shape, it's a locking mechanism. In nature, it shows up in things like honeycombs. But when applied through Saturn's energy, it becomes something else. The fixed hex. The curse. The freeze. Why do you think they call it a hex when referring to a spell? Because 6 is the containment number. It freezes intention. It stabilizes control. It blocks expansion. Now bring it into modern usage. Look at corporate logos, 6-point stars, interlocking hexes, cubes embedded in negative space. Not design trends. Symbolic allegiance. These companies aren't just branding, they're broadcasting. 6 is built into the names, the slogans, the symbology. The system sells itself through repetition of its control code. 6 sides, 6 layers, 6 cycles. And you buy into it every time you submit to its structure without questioning why it's always the same. You're not looking at a mystical horror number. You're looking at Saturn's operating system. The number 6 repeated is like a signature, an echo. 666 is the calling card of limitation imposed on every layer of your reality. 3 sixes. 3 dimensions. 3 levels of control of mind, body, soul. That's why the number shows up at the intersection of politics, religion, and commerce. The trinity of dominion. Not divine. Mechanical. Deliberate. Engineered. And then you get to the deeper level, gematria. Hebrew letter number correspondences. You'll find that the name Saturn corresponds to 666 in multiple variations of the practice. This isn't a fluke. Ancient priests weren't throwing dice. They were encoding planetary forces into language, sound, and number. In esoteric Kabbalah, the tree of life has Saturn placed on the sphere of Bina, structure, form, severity. The enforcer. The limiter. Everything in that position aligns with the 6s. And the 6 isn't random, it's the harmonizer of fixed design. The prison architect's master number. Even in Rome, the cult of Saturn held festivals of inversion. Saturnalia. Chaos on the surface. But underneath? Structured control. 6 days of madness. Then back to order. The illusion of freedom followed by reimposed law. This isn't myth. It's a feedback loop. A controlled release. The valve opens. Pressure drops. Then the gate slams shut again. Saturn's system isn't just about punishment. It's about keeping the machine running. Every ancient mystery tradition, every hidden doctrine, every forbidden teaching that survived censorship, torture, and systematic erasure says the same thing: there are layers to this reality. And those layers are guarded. Not by metaphor, not by philosophy, by actual entities, systems, frequencies that intercept consciousness before it ever makes it out. This isn't poetic. This isn't up for debate. Every legitimate ancient school, Egyptian, Hermetic, Gnostic, Babylonian, mapped out a post-death path. And every single one of them warned about the same thing: interception at the exit. You die? Your body drops, your consciousness detaches. But don't kid yourself, you're not suddenly free. You don't float into the blissful light and play harps. You're processed, interrogated, filtered, recycled. You encounter beings, sometimes called judges, sometimes Archons, sometimes gatekeepers, who aren't there to liberate you. They're there to send you back. And the final checkpoint, the highest layer, the last and most fortified trap, is Saturn. That's the last gate before real freedom, and almost no one gets past it. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes this system in brutal detail. The weighing of the heart isn't just morality theater, it's a vibrational measurement. If you resonate with truth, you pass. But what they don't tell you is, the entire system is designed to make sure you don't. You've been embedded with fear, shame, guilt, identity, trauma, addiction, and memory loops for lifetimes. So when it's your turn at the gate, you fail the frequency check. Not because you're evil, because you're programmed. That's how the trap works. The Tibetan Book of the Dead tells you something similar. After death, you face visions, gods, demons, dazzling lights. Most of it is illusion, projection, interference. And if you don't recognize it for what it is, you're dragged back into rebirth. The system doesn't care what you believe. It cares how you respond. And most people panic. They follow the light. They obey the voice. They kneel before the judge. They choose familiarity over uncertainty. That's how you get caught again. And again. And again. And the final choice isn't a choice at all. By the time you reach Saturn's gate, you're already disoriented. You've had your life reviewed, your mistakes amplified, your trauma echoed back at you like a mirror from hell. You're told you need to do better, to try again, to fulfill your purpose. And you believe it. Because the gate doesn't appear as a monster. It appears as light. It speaks in comfort. It disguises itself as God, guardian, guide. But it's not. It's the filter. The lock. The administrator of the soul farm. This isn't fear porn. This is structure. Saturn sits at the top of the reincarnation loop not because it wants to torture you, but because it's been tasked with administration. Saturn is the bureaucrat of the astral world. The processor. The compliance officer. It doesn't rage. It doesn't weep. It evaluates. And if your frequency doesn't match escape velocity, you're reissued a contract and thrown back into matter. You think free will means anything in that process? It doesn't. Free will only applies inside the loop. Once you're dead, the script activates. The programming kicks in. Unless you've dismantled it, truly, deeply, completely, you won't even realize you're still being controlled. You'll take the bait, you'll follow the tunnel, and you'll wake up in another body wondering why life feels like déjà vu, like exhaustion, like pressure without cause. That's the trap working perfectly. That's Saturn's function fully operational. You want the real kicker? Some traditions say the only way to break free from Saturn's grip is to confront it directly. Not bow. Not worship. Not plead. But call it out. Recognize the system. Deconstruct the programming. The Gnostics called this gnosis, knowing, not believing. And knowing isn't a thought. It's frequency. It's clarity. And it has to be earned through absolute self-deprogramming. Not rituals. Not prayers. Not gurus. You're not fighting evil. You're confronting design. Thank you for watching this video to the end. This isn't the kind of content most people are ready for, and I know that. But if you made it here, it means you're not most people. It means you're starting to see the architecture. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Stay sharp, stay alert, and question everything. I'll see you in the next one.